It was a Texas evening like any other, or at least it tried to be. The sky over Austin was stretching wide and golden, that kind of warm, effortless light that made everything look a little more forgiving than it really was. I sat on our front porch, elbows on the armrest of that old rocking chair Julia insisted we keep even after the wood started to split. My phone sat in my hand, dim screen glowing against the twilight, but I wasn't really reading anything. I was just existing, letting my thumb scroll without purpose. The air was rich with the scent of fresh-cut grass, jasmine from the neighbor's yard, and that subtle citrus note from Julia's favorite lemon iced tea steeping in the kitchen. Inside, the sound of mugs clinking together echoed from the dishwasher, followed by the soft squeak of the cabinet hinge Julia always said she'd fix but never did. It was all comfortingly mundane, the kind of soundtrack you don't notice until something feels wrong. And that night, something did. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was, only that it had crept in like humidity. Quiet, invisible, but hard to ignore once it was there. Some days, I could feel it in the way she'd hold her coffee mug, fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the ceramic. Other days, it was in her silences, long, weighty pauses where once there had been casual chatter or inside jokes. I'd ask how her day went and get a polite summary, but not much else. The warmth was still there, but muted, like music playing from another room, just low enough that you couldn't quite catch the melody. A week earlier, she'd flown to Colorado Springs for her company's leadership retreat. I'd helped her pack. She was excited in a way I hadn't seen in a while, practically glowing as she folded her blazers and stacked heels into a carry-on. "It's all women-led, very empowerment-focused," she'd said, grinning as she tossed in a book with a title about reclaiming your power. Kind of like therapy meets corporate strategy. I kissed her goodbye at the airport, watched her disappear into security with that easy stride and a silk scarf around her neck, looking like she belonged in one of those ads for travel credit cards. I remember feeling proud of her in that moment, even a little lucky. We had our issues like anyone else, but we were solid, or so I thought. She came back 5 days later, rested, re-energized, but changed. I don't mean in a dramatic way. She didn't come home with a shaved head or a new tattoo or anything like that. But there was something about the way she moved. Calmer but more distant, like her thoughts were in a different time zone. She talked about the retreat a lot, how freeing it was, how centering the group meditations had been. She told me about this woman she'd met named Caroline, a kind of self-styled life coach/poet who led some of the late-night sessions. Caroline had this whole philosophy around int**mate independence. Apparently, it's about discovering connection without the crutch of physical dependency, Julia explained one night as we made dinner together. I was chopping onions while she leaned against the counter, glass of wine in hand. I nodded, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. I remember thinking it all sounded a little new age-y, but I was glad she'd had a good time. Glad she felt something that lit her up again. But then came the dinner party story. We were out on the patio a few nights later, watching the sun dip below the rooftops, when she told me about a moment at the retreat's closing dinner. Picture it. Cocktails flowing, a few execs sharing war stories, the kind of light-hearted energy that makes people a little too honest. And right in the middle of it, she decided to drop this one-liner. Honestly, I think physical int**Macy in marriage is kind of outdated, like rotary phones and handwritten letters. She told me the room erupted in laughter. Even the CFO apparently did a spit take into her Pinot Noir. And I laughed too, hearing about it after the fact. I made some dumb joke about being a technologically obsolete husband, and clinked my glass against hers. But it stayed with me. Even after we went to bed, after the lights were off and the house went quiet, the sentence kept echoing in my mind. I turned it over like a coin in my palm, something that looked harmless but might be heavier than it seemed. The next day, I asked her about it again, kind of half-teasing. I said, "So, what's the going rate for a non-int**mate marriage these days? Do I get a discount if I do the dishes without being asked?" She smiled at me, a tight, unreadable smile. "I meant it," she said. Not cruelly, not dramatically, just plainly, like it was a fact, like she was reading the weather report. I think we've evolved past all that. Don't you? I laughed. Because that's what you do when the ground shifts beneath your feet and you're not ready to deal with what that means. You laugh. And then you pretend you didn't just feel the first crack run through the floorboards. But that night, as I lay next to her and listened to her breath slow into sleep, I stared at the ceiling and thought, evolved past what, exactly? And if she had evolved, where did that leave me? The shift didn't happen overnight, but looking back, I can trace it back to that conversation. That's when the weather started to change, slowly, subtly, like the first signs of an incoming storm. Julia began using words like clarity and realignment in our everyday conversations, words I had never heard her use before, at least not like that. She was reading more books with titles about personal awakenings and the false and asterisk macy of modern relationships. She started journaling every morning with her tea, sitting cross-legged on the porch in a way that made our lives feel like something out of a mindfulness ad. It wasn't just new habits. It was a whole new vocabulary, a new set of beliefs she seemed to be pulling from somewhere I couldn't follow. Then came what she called her quiet proposal. It was a Sunday afternoon. I remember it clearly because the Cowboys were playing, and I just cracked open a beer. Julia came into the living room, wearing those linen pants she only broke out when she wanted to be taken seriously. She stood there for a moment, like she was rehearsing something in her head, and then she said she wanted to talk. There wasn't anything obviously alarming in her tone. She wasn't angry, wasn't sad, just calm. Calm in a way that put me on edge immediately. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, folding herself into the armchair across from me. "And I feel like we've been hiding behind closeness, physical closeness. It's become a way for us to avoid deeper issues." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean? We haven't even been close lately." She nodded, as if I just confirmed her point. "Exactly, because when we're not being physical, we don't know what to do with each other. And I think we need to change that." She said it like she was suggesting we rearrange the furniture, not strip away one of the last things tethering us together. "I think we should take int asterisk Macy off the table," she said. "Not forever, just for now, as a reset." I sat there stunned. I didn't even know what to say. To her, this was some enlightened approach to deepening our connection. To me, it felt like rejection wrapped in a TED Talk. "I'm not saying I don't love you," she added quickly. "I do. But I think we've been relying on the physical stuff to distract us from what's broken." The words landed like a gut punch. Because from where I was sitting, our int asterisk Macy wasn't a distraction. It was one of the few places we still understood each other. It was memory, safety. It was the version of us that still worked, even when everything else felt off. But she was resolute. She wasn't asking. She was informing me. In the days that followed, I told myself I was overreacting. That maybe she was right, that maybe this was some necessary reboot. But as the space between us grew wider, I began to see that this wasn't a pause. It was a quiet unraveling. One thread at a time, Julia moved more and more into her study, which she started calling her creative sanctuary. It used to be the room where she kept our tax documents and the binder of family recipes. Now it was filled with incense, soft instrumental music, and a string of handwritten affirmations taped to the walls. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to knock or schedule an appointment, but I didn't dare enter without asking first. She was in there for hours. Some nights, I'd go to bed alone and wake up to the faint sound of her voice coming through the vents, whispering along with guided meditations or recorded messages from a woman named Caroline. Caroline. That name became a regular fixture in Julia's sentences. "Caroline says this," or "Caroline helped me see that." From what I gathered, they'd met on some online forum for women exploring non-traditional connection models. Whatever that meant, Caroline wasn't a therapist, at least not officially. She was more like a digital oracle, a poet, a coach, a guru. Julia hung on every word she wrote. I started catching glimpses of her emails. Lines like, "The body is a beautiful distraction," and "Desire clouds the path to true partnership." At first, I brushed it off as new age fluff, but then I saw the way Julia's eyes lit up when a new message landed in her inbox. The way she'd smile, tuck her hair behind her ear, and whisper, "God, she just gets it," like Caroline was the one holding her together, not me. That's when the real doubt began to creep in. Was this really about spiritual growth? Or was it about Caroline? I never asked. I didn't know how. I felt ridiculous even thinking it. But the warmth that used to flow between us, the casual touches, the unspoken glances, it had gone cold. And she was still dressing like she had somewhere to be, even if she never left the house. Tailored blouses, lipstick in the middle of a Tuesday, like she was showing up for someone else, someone I couldn't see. The worst part? She never looked at me the way she looked at her laptop screen. I tried to bring it up once. Asked her if she was okay, if she still felt connected to me. She looked up from her tea and said, "This is part of the process, babe. Let's not confuse discomfort with disconnection." But that's exactly what it felt like. Disconnection, slow and suffocating. Some nights, I'd lie in bed listening to the wind rattle the windows, staring at the empty space beside me where she used to sleep. I'd wonder if she'd already left in her mind, if I was just the last one to notice. The joke from the retreat kept playing in my head like a broken record. Macy in marriage is outdated. At the time, I'd laughed. God, I laughed so hard. Everyone did. But now, sitting in the shell of what used to be our marriage, it didn't feel funny anymore. Felt like a warning I'd missed entirely. It's strange how silence can say more than a scream. The kind of silence that creeps in not because there's peace, but because there's nothing left to say that won't draw blood. That's what our house had become. Quiet, not like a sanctuary, but like a museum. Like we were both walking around a place we used to live in, careful not to touch anything. I started noticing how little we touched at all. It wasn't just the lack of S***X. It was how her hand never found mine during movies anymore. How we brushed past each other in the kitchen like strangers in a supermarket aisle. We could stand 3 feet apart and feel like we were living in different time zones. I tried to bring back little things. I made her favorite omelet one morning and left it for her with a note. Just a simple "thought you might like this" written in Sharpie. The plate was still on the counter when I came home from work, cold and untouched. She'd made herself a smoothie instead. "I'm trying to stay light," she said when I asked about it. Like that answered everything. I didn't argue. I just threw the omelet away and said nothing. Caroline's name came up more often than mine. Julia would reference her ideas mid-conversation, quoting her like scripture. "Caroline says we hold too tightly to comfort, and it keeps us from evolving." Or, "Caroline reminded me that needing someone is different than choosing them." At first, I listened politely. Then I stopped listening at all. One night I asked, trying to keep my voice even, "You talk about her a lot. What is she exactly? A friend? A mentor?" Julia didn't answer right away. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through her iPad. She looked up, expression unreadable. "She's just someone who sees the world the way I'm trying to." That sentence stuck with me. Not someone who helped her, not someone she learned from. Someone who saw the world the way she wanted to. Like Julia had already decided the direction she was going, and it wasn't toward me. That night, I had a dream where Julia and I were in a field of wheat, under one of those massive Texas skies. We were holding hands, and she was leading me somewhere. But the further we walked, the harder it got to hold on. Her grip loosened, and the wind picked up, and suddenly I wasn't holding her hand anymore. I was holding air. I woke up with my chest tight, sweat clinging to my back, and when I turned to reach for her in bed, she wasn't there. Just a folded blanket, neatly pressed against the pillow. I found her in the study, surrounded by candlelight, whispering into her laptop screen like she was in prayer. When she saw me standing in the doorway, she jumped a little. "You scared me," she said, clutching her robe around her. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Didn't realize you were still up." "I'm just journaling," she said quickly, minimizing something on the screen. "I do my best thinking at night." She didn't invite me in. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, then turned around and walked back to our bedroom alone. That's when I started to wonder if this was about Caroline, or if Caroline was just the latest excuse. Maybe Julia wasn't finding herself. Maybe she was just writing me out of the story. The thing is, you don't need an affair to feel betrayed. Sometimes the betrayal is emotional, subtle. It's in the way someone stops choosing you slowly over 100 tiny decisions. The canceled date nights, the cold dinners, the way their laughter doesn't come easy anymore, unless it's for someone else's joke or someone else's email. I caught a glimpse of one of them by accident. Julia had left her inbox open on her tablet. I didn't go snooping, it was just there. A subject line caught my eye, returning to your true self. The sender? Caroline. I shouldn't have read it, I know that, but I did. Inside, it was a cascade of affirmations and poetic language that felt deliberately seductive. The soul longs to be seen without skin. Physicality is noise when the spirit is screaming. That line hit me like S***ker punch. Julia had started using that same phrase about the body being noise. I thought it was metaphorical, but here it was lifted straight from someone else's doctrine. There was something else too. A signature at the bottom. All my warmth, see. That warmth hadn't been directed at me in weeks. And I couldn't help but feel like she was giving her heart away in pieces, wrapped in philosophy and well-lit Zoom calls. I didn't confront her. Not then. I just closed the tablet and sat there, alone in the kitchen, watching the clock change minute by minute, wondering when exactly I'd lost her. The retreat had been a week. 7 days. Somehow, in that time, she'd found someone whose voice she trusted more than mine. Someone who made her feel new. And what was I supposed to do with that? Compete with a concept? Fight for her against an idea of selfhood and spiritual awakening? I wanted to scream, but there was no one to hear it. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I started keeping notes. Quietly, methodically. I wasn't planning anything dramatic. I just needed to make sense of what was happening. So I wrote down the nights she stayed up late, the quotes she borrowed, the patterns that kept repeating. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Maybe proof. Maybe closure. Maybe just a breadcrumb trail for the day she finally looked me in the eye and said what I already knew. That she was leaving. Or worse, that she had already left. I don't know when I stopped hoping she'd come back. There wasn't a big blowout. No screaming match. No suitcase hurled down the stairs. What happened between us was quieter than that. Slower, sadder. Like a light fading from a room you didn't realize had gotten dark until you tried to read in it. And by then it was too late. Julia started spending nights at her sister's place to think. At least that's what she told me. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask how many nights to think required. The truth is, I think we were both relieved to be away from each other. The space between us had become so dense it felt like another person lived there. Someone we couldn't talk around. A few days later, I came home from work to find a yellow legal pad sitting on the dining table, right where I used to leave her little notes. Back when things were soft. The pad had her handwriting on the first page, neat and controlled. There was no salutation. No dear. Just words. She wrote that she was going to stay with a friend for a while. Not her sister, a friend. No name. No address. She said she needed distance to process everything. And that she didn't want to say goodbye in person because we both deserve a peaceful parting. As if disappearing without looking me in the eye could be called peaceful. I stood there in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounding too loud, reading that letter over and over until the words lost all meaning. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stood there, swallowing that strange new reality one dry breath at a time. That night, I poured a glass of her lemon iced tea, the same kind she used to drink out on the porch, and sat where she used to sit. The chair was colder than I remembered. The sunset looked the same, though. Same wide sky, same warm light stretching over the rooftops like a memory trying to linger. I sat there for hours, thinking about the retreat, about Caroline, about the moment she stopped seeing me as her partner and started seeing me as part of the problem. I thought about how many times I'd missed the signs, brushed off the silences, laughed at the wrong jokes. And I wondered if she ever really wanted me to follow her down that road she was on. Or if she just needed me to step aside so she could walk it alone. The house is quiet now. Not heavy, not haunted, just quiet. I still catch myself making coffee for two. I still sleep on one side of the bed. Her books are gone. Her framed poetry print vanished from the hallway. But the echo of her voice still lives in the walls, in the spaces we shared, in the version of us that once felt unshakable. She didn't leave in a fury. She left in fragments. And I'm still here, gathering them one by one, trying to understand how a love like ours unraveled without ever making a sound.